It's 23rd July 2020. Thank you for choosing OMN. We're live on both our Facebook page and YouTube channel. My name is Asli Gilgalo. Stay with us. Ethiopia is an unprecedented political and constitutional crisis. It's been hard to get a sense of what's going on due to internet shutdown and internal division. Among other factors, of course, internet has been restored today in Ethiopia after 23 days of blackout. Reports of torture, rape and murder of people suspected of supporting opposition groups is coming out. Joining me now is Professor Shetel Tronvoll, a professor of peace and conflict studies at Björknes University College and director Oslo Analytica, political anthropologist, Africa analyst and conflict advisor. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
And so we start with, as an international observer, of course, you've been following what has been happening in Ethiopia for a long time. And what we're seeing now is not something that just happened out of the blue. There must have been some underlying issues. So what do you think are the causes of the crisis that we're witnessing now in Ethiopia?
Yes, certainly. I think this is has many underlying causes, as you say, and it's been a long-term process, and it's just a new phase of a political trajectory we have seen over at least the last 5-6 years, starting with the Cairo protest in 2015-2016. It's still an ongoing evolvement on that. We did have the change of power within EPRDF, April 2018, and then the transformation of the party into Prosperity Party. And it's a multi-layered contested issues we do see unfolding. You have issues of contestation within Oromia region. You have issues of contestation between the various regional states in Ethiopia. And you have issues of contestation between some regional states and the federal government. And to a certain degree, you also have some international relations and international issues also binding into the internal conflict dynamics in Ethiopia. So it is hard to identify only one or a simple set of factors involving or feeding the current political crisis.
Thank you so much. Let's talk a little bit about Hachalu's murder and how it was handled by the government, and of course why his assassination, which is an issue of human rights, was ethnicized, and instead of general condemnation by the whole Ethiopian people, or rather population. What is the missing link in the social fabric of that nation?
Yes, I will not speculate on any reasons or causes for the assassination, because it is an ongoing investigation into that. But we do see, as you say, that various segments or certain segments of the Ethiopian population are interpreting this differently. And you also see a general outcry, I believe, of the killing, outcry by all Ethiopians, more or less. But the ethnicized interpretation comes to when people try to identify the perpetrators of this brutal act. And then general sentiments of othering and enmity comes into play, and various accusations are raised between different segments of the populations. But I do believe that all Ethiopians are in despair over the killing and also the tragic events unfolding in its aftermath.
So after his assassination, we saw the protests that rocked the country and even the diaspora. But this led to the killing of a lot of people and the arrest of opposition leaders like Jawar, Bakele Garba, and other people. So will there be consequence of this political arrests?
Well, yes, again, these are investigations into those arrests leading, the charges presented are now investigated further, as I understand it. It's hard to not interpret this again as part of the longer term trajectory of political development in the country. And as we also see that some of the accusations raised against some of these individuals goes back to the unrest of last year too, as presented by the Attorney General's office. So I think we have to wait to see the full presentation of evidence by the Attorney General, and then how the Ethiopian courts will treat that evidence. It seems to be, or at least many international observers and Ethiopians are questioning the arrest of the political leadership of various parties for this act. And it's not only the OFC leadership which have been arrested, also other political representatives from other parties have been arrested. You also have to keep that in mind. It seems pretty chaotic. Yes, exactly, like Iskinder Nega. So it seems pretty chaotic, and I will not speculate if everyone is in cahoot with each other. It seems we have to wait to see the material evidence presented, if they manage to get that.
Yeah, that is right. So Abiy is in a tight spot right now, a very tough one. Tigray is set to conduct elections in September, and the Oromo opposition leaders that are behind bars right now had said before that they will not recognize the legality of this government after October. So how long, everyone is asking, how long can Abiy stay in power with the divisions that are there right now?
Again, I will not speculate in that. I see, yes, that various opposition parties in Ethiopia are claiming that post-October the government will not be a constitutionally anchored government. The consequences of that we have to wait and see. Tigray have chosen their path. They will conduct a regional election. They have just established a regional election commission and now working hard to prepare that. And that is, of course, a clear signal that they feel the need, again, it's two-level need. They feel the need to have a re-elected regional assembly in Mekelle to guide the process further for Tigray. And then again, they feel the need of filling up new representatives at the federal level. So that is the most kind of concrete initiative we have in the near future of challenging the federal level political legitimacy. But again, the federal government have asked for and received a constitutional interpretation, and in that regard, the federal government believe they act within the constitutional framework of Ethiopia. So as such, it is still a legitimate government running until the proper institutions say otherwise.
If Tigray's election pushes through, do we see other regional governments taking the same route?
So far, to my belief, no other regional government have explicitly hinted to that, but it depends again on the timing or the information emanating from the federal institutions on when the scheduled 2020 elections will be conducted. I think if it is still kept kind of an indefinite postponement, we might see maybe other regional government going to that step later.
Another question that keeps coming up when we're discussing about Ethiopia is the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So the question right now is the peace deal a ploy? Because people are saying if Isaias and Abiy actually wanted to have the agreement or peaceful coexistence, there would be a solid agreement by now. So is it a ploy or?
Well, I have been researching the peace processes and the war for 20 or so years between Eritrea and Ethiopia. I don't see, the biggest challenge we do have concerning the peace process is the lack of institutionalization of it. It's still just the paper signed in 2018 is it valid. It's no further bilateral ratified framework of agreements between the two states. So the process relies so far on the personal relationship between Prime Minister Abiy and the President Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea. How durable, how sustainable that process will be is then, might be questioned when it lacks the further institutionalization. And adding to this problem is obviously the fact that the conflict, one of the core elements of the conflict is, of course, rests in Tigray, both the disputed territories, but also the involvement of the TPLF as a party to the conflict itself as it originated. So as long as the third party to the conflict is left outside of the solution to the core issues, I put a question mark behind the sustainability of the peace process.
Thank you. Still on the Eritrea issue, we've seen Abiy, the Prime Minister, visit Eritrea often, and Isaias also coming to Ethiopia. The latest being last weekend, where Abiy went to Eritrea together with the Chief of Intelligence, and they visited a military camp there. And while they were there, the Chief of Defense, the Defense Minister of Eritrea went to Sudan, where they have a military station based there. People are saying this is a plot to scare TPLF. What does this entail for the national politics and, of course, the existing schism?
Yes, it's an interesting observation to use that term, that a head of government can go to a neighboring state and visit its head of government who has a long-term conflict and interest to crush a part or a segment of the population in that country. Certainly from, at least as my interlocutors in Tigray tells me, this is interpreted as a potential plot or strategy to corner them even further. It's always, of course, positive that governments interact through dialogue and meet each other, even meet other governments who are not that friendly. So I'm encouraging, obviously, that President Isaias and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed should continue their dialogue in order to try to avoid a new fallback to a bilateral war between Eritrea and Ethiopia. But at the same time, I think it would be advisable to be very transparent and open about the agendas they do discuss, since we know President Isaias Afwerki do have an axe to grind with Tigray and is also coming with rather threatening statements against the viability of the Tigray regional government. So in that regard, such meetings should be open and the agenda should be transparent in order to pacify internal domestic concerns in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. From the protests that have been going on in the diaspora, we've seen a crazy split on Abiy. Some people standing with him, another group, standing pro-Abiy protest, and of course the Oromo protests that have been going on. And remembering that most of these people left the country due to their political views and they were afraid of facing persecution in their own country. But now it's interesting that some are actually supporting, others are, of course, calling for his resignation. What does this split mean for Ethiopian politics?
Yes, it is a deep division, obviously, also certainly reflected in the diaspora. And over the last 2 weeks, we have seen a number of rallies, demonstrations in various capitals and cities across Europe and US, casting light on the politics in Ethiopia. And particularly here in Norway, of course, the pressure and the criticism of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee has been mounting because of the awarding Prime Minister Abiy the Peace Prize last year. I think, we have to accept, and it's of course naturally, that all people, be that Ethiopian people at large or the Oromia people, have differences of political opinions. Of course, that's natural, that you would have a varieties of political opinions on how politics should be articulated, how the state should be organized, ideology, and so on and so forth. That is nothing, it's nothing strange in that. The polarization and the kind of black and white presentation of politics is what is making it harder to both for outsiders to understand, to get a grasp of what's going on, and also I think is not constructive at all in order to move the politics forward in Ethiopia. Nothing is black and white in Ethiopia. You have a range of nuances on all sides, and one need to be more careful in how one articulates one position, and also to seek out a common framework of understanding or a common platform of dialogue, both inside the opposition parties, so to say, between opposition parties, but certainly also from the federal government to the variety of oppositions which exists. That the Oromo people have different outlooks of politics, that's natural, and it will continue to be like that. One shouldn't try to rally behind only one set of answers to a multitude of challenges. There are many answers to the challenges the Oromo people are facing and the Ethiopian people are facing.
Just a year back, there was so much hope for transition to democracy, but all that has changed now. People are saying that vision, that dream, that hope has been hijacked. Is there hope to transition? Has it been mismanaged? Is there hope that they would ever get back on track?
Certainly, and democratic transitions take decades, maybe even generations. It was extremely naive to believe that Ethiopia should turn democratic soon after Abiy took power. I wrote some pieces on that, and all research, both in Ethiopia and comparative politics, indicates that wouldn't happen. It takes long time to democratize a state and state institutions which have been authoritarian for decades or forever. Yes, certainly Ethiopia will move forward and will gradually increase democratic space and also reform its institutions and its laws. Remember that the institutions of checks and balances in Ethiopia today cannot be seen as independent from the executive power. And you need firmly established, firmly reformed, recruited and legalized institutions of checks and balances. That takes long time. So I think part of some of the problems are exactly the extremely high expectations, both projected by the government itself, but certainly also projected by various other actors, that everything now should be home free, that everything should be democratized within a year or two. That is extremely naive position.
Thank you very much. We know the eagerly awaited election was indefinitely postponed due to the COVID-19 crisis, and which people are saying that might not even be the case. And no one knows the exact date of the election. And the fear is Abiy might stay in power uncontested. Could there be such possibility?
I will not speculate in that. That we have to wait and see.
Some are arguing that no one can challenge him, having that he's the only one that can appeal to all nationalities if elections were to be held. What's your take on this?
I think in any country, if it is presented as that the prime minister or president is non-replaceable, that no one can replace him, that's an extremely dangerous discourse. There are 110 million people in Ethiopia. I'm sure there are competent people among those 110 million who can be in government and who can be elected as a prime minister.
Mm-hmm. You said we should not expect democracy with Abiy just coming to power the other day and Ethiopia turning out to be a democratic country all of a sudden. But then again, there are changes that are happening in the country. Like Oromia Media Network, which went back home to operate and was licensed. The license has now been withdrawn in Ethiopia and the offices were raided and closed. And the rumor that is coming out of the country right now is that some political parties like OLF could be listed again as, an unlawful organization in the country and might not end up on the ballot box. So could Ethiopia be sliding back again to the dark days it was?
Well, you have seen a fluctuating democratic space, to use that term, and we have seen issued over the last year reports from international human rights agencies, both Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, reports of concern and reports of gross human rights violations. I know that the Attorney General Office have disputed some of these claims and have investigated them themselves. But certainly there seems to be that some issues of openness and democratic space have been rolled back. The arrests of journalists. Ethiopia used to be the highest ranking country in the world arresting journalists. Then you had a brief window where you didn't see that, where everyone was released. Now you see again accusations raised against journalists, reminiscent of accusations and phrasings used earlier. And the same with some opposition politicians. Of course, that is of a concern that this democratic space might be restricted again to a certain degree. But we should give time then for the prosecution to present its material evidence in these cases, and it has to be judged upon that, obviously. If this is an adequate way forward, or if it is a political manipulated way to restrict opposition space in the forthcoming election.
Thank you. Just like it was reported by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, among other organizations, the killings and the arbitrary arrests that are going on in the country, it's actually rising from what it was last time. The same magnitude they released is the same one they're now, arresting people. And today, a lot of people were killed in Hararge as well. So do we see this country going to full-blown, violence?
I'm not sure what you mean by full-blown violence. It's certainly worrying, the unrest and the killings, and we have to keep in mind and we have to remember that most, or if not all, of the victims of these atrocities are innocent bystanders, do not have political authority, or are not decision makers, or are not responsible for the grievances felt by the majority. So it's only to hope that the Ethiopian people of all backgrounds should keep restraint and keep a moderation in how one are articulating one's political grievances. If the development will degenerate further, I again will not speculate in that. We have to wait and see. Of course, it hinges on certainly how the government responses to the grievances articulated are met, but it also relates to both a diaspora, an Ethiopian diaspora, which are extremely active, and in many views, the diaspora are playing a more negative role than a positive role in moderating and pacifying the violence we see in Ethiopia today. And also internal actors from the opposition side and others need to seek more peaceful avenues to express their grievances. That's all one can hope for, and that a certain, consensus of a dialogue on the way forward should be reached.
Mm-hmm. Different dimensions are being attached to the conflict in Ethiopia. And one that we saw, and you also commented online, was the attempt to frame Oromos as a regional threat, and that Oromos forming a super state with the Borana brothers from Kenya. So is that a vision that you've seen, or rather you've identified as being there?
Well, actually, just today, it was released an academic paper written by my colleague, Professor Terje Østebø, and myself, where we discuss the political landscape of Oromia, the current politics and divisions in Oromia. During our research this year, which was concluded in field in March, we never picked up that kind of, if I may use the term, conspiracy theory of aligning with the Kenyan Borana and to get a more increased pan-Ethiopian crossing both Ethiopia and Kenya political platform. We didn't hear that in the areas where we worked, which were more or less all parts of Oromia. How the politics is articulated on the other side of the border, among the Borana of Kenya, I don't know. We did not do fieldwork there. So maybe there are some sentiments there who wants to link up with the Oromo fractions and fronts inside Ethiopia. I will not speculate in that.
Mm-hmm. What do we expect? We cannot, of course, and you can also not tell the future, but you've been following this issue closely. So what do we expect in the coming days in both Oromia and Ethiopia in general?
Well, again, one can hope that peace will be restored, that you will have a outcome of the current crisis in terms of destructions and killings, which have happened over the last 2-3 weeks. That's everyone should be working towards that goal. And I think I will keep it on that. I don't want to speculate in any forthcoming events or processes. We see a trajectory of the last numbers of years gradually pushing forward political reforms in Ethiopia. But this is a process which will go back and forth, which will fluctuate, and you will have backsliding phases in this overall political process moving forward. And I've only studied Ethiopian politics for 30 years, and I hope I will maybe manage to study 30 years more, and that's about the perspective I think we will need to see a consolidated transition in Ethiopia. It is not finished this year.
30 years is a long time, and of course you're hoping for another 30 years. As a professor of peace and conflict, as a conflict advisor, what would you advise the people of Ethiopia going forward?
I will certainly advise for moderation, advise for dialogue, advise to articulate one's grievances, and I 100% respect most of these grievances are legitimate political grievances. But one should also understand that your own political view is not necessarily the only view which are legitimate. There are a number of legitimate views in Ethiopia. How one should think about the Ethiopian state in terms of unitary federalist arrangements, how one should think about organizing politics, if that should be on ethnic basis or ideological basis, and one need to respect those differences of opinion. That there are legitimate different opinions the adversary might hold, and one should seek to define the process forward based on dialogue and not on coercion or violence. And that relates to all parties in the country.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, Professor Shettle.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for staying with us. This is Oromia Media Network. We've been live on both Facebook and YouTube. For those who have not watched, you can go back and review. Thank you so much to my technical team. And of course, I'll see you tomorrow, same place, same time. My name is Asli Gelgalo. We've been talking to Professor Shettle Tronvoll, a professor of peace and conflict at Björknes University College and director of Oslo Analytica. Thank you so much. Do have a lovely evening.